The first time my wife refused to touch my wheelchair, she did it in front of a judge, a bailiff, 2 attorneys, and a room full of strangers pretending not to stare. My name is Daniel Whitaker, 42 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and that morning I learned something colder than betrayal. I learned that some people do not abandon you when you fall. They wait until everyone is watching, then step over you like you were never a man at all. The courthouse hallway smelled like floor wax, stale coffee, and rain dragged in on the soles of expensive shoes. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me, turning every face pale and tired. My wheelchair caught on the thick lip of a dark blue carpet just outside courtroom 4B. The front wheels stuck against the edge like the building itself had decided to test me before the hearing even started. I pressed both palms against the rims and pushed. The chair rocked, stopped, then rolled back half an inch. My hands were already raw from the parking garage, where the accessible spaces had been full, and I had crossed nearly 40 yards of wet concrete, while Melissa walked ahead under a black umbrella that used to be mine. She stood 3 steps away from me now in a cream-colored dress and tan heels, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear, her face calm in that polished way real estate agents learn when a house has water damage and the buyer has not noticed yet. She saw the chair catch. I know she saw it, because her eyes flicked down, then away. A young clerk holding a stack of folders paused beside us and asked softly, "Ma'am, could you help your husband with the chair?" For 1 second, the hallway went still enough for me to hear the rain ticking against the courthouse windows. Melissa did not look at me. She adjusted the strap of her purse and said, clear enough for the clerk, the bailiff, and God himself to hear. He wanted sympathy. Let him roll in with it. Nobody laughed. That almost made it worse. Laughter gives pain somewhere to go. Silence just holds it in place. I kept my eyes on the carpet, not because I was ashamed, but because if I looked at her right then, I might have remembered too much. The woman who once slept curled against my shoulder during thunderstorms. The woman who cried when I carried her over the threshold of our first house. The woman who promised, in sickness and in health, with her hand trembling inside mine like those words had weight. I pushed again. The tendons in my wrists burned. The rubber rims squeaked under my palms. The chair lurched over the carpet strip, and I rolled forward alone into the courtroom while my wife walked past me like a stranger arriving early to collect what she believed she was owed. Her attorney, Brandon Pierce, rose when she entered, all silver cuff links and courtroom confidence. My attorney, Thomas Caldwell, stayed seated beside me, one hand resting on a yellow legal pad, his expression unreadable. Judge Eleanor Hayes had not come out yet. The bench was empty. The flag stood motionless in the corner, and the wooden tables shone under the lights like everything in that room had been polished except the truth. Melissa sat across from me without a glance. She opened a tissue, pressed it beneath one eye, and practiced looking broken. I had seen that face before at charity lunches, hospital fundraisers, and neighborhood gatherings where she told people how hard it was caring for a disabled husband. She wore sacrifice beautifully, better than she had ever worn love. I did not speak. I did not correct her. I did not tell the clerk what she had done in the hallway. Men like me learn that dignity is sometimes just keeping your voice steady when every part of you wants to ask why. Then the side door opened. Everyone stood. I locked my wheels and remained where I was, because standing was no longer something my body could offer on command. Judge Hayes took her seat, opened the file, and looked first at Melissa, then at me. Her eyes paused on the wheelchair, not with pity, but with attention. That was different. Melissa's attorney began with a soft voice and sharp words, painting my wife as a woman trapped by duty, drained by years of caregiving, forced to manage a bitter husband who could no longer manage himself. He said she deserved the house, control of the settlement, and protection from my resentment. Melissa lowered her head at all the right moments. I watched her shoulders rise and fall as if the weight of me had nearly crushed her. Then Judge Hayes lifted one hand, and the room went quiet. She leaned forward just slightly and asked, "Mrs. Whitaker, before we discuss what you believe you are owed, I need to understand one thing." Melissa looked up, ready for sympathy. The judge's voice stayed calm. "When exactly did you stop being his wife?" The question did not land like an accusation. It landed like a key sliding into a lock. Melissa blinked once, then twice, and for the first time that morning her expression slipped out of place. Brandon Pierce stood halfway from his chair, smiling the way attorneys smile when they want to slow down a train without admitting there is a train. Your Honor, my client has been his wife through years of hardship, he said. The emotional burden alone has been significant. Judge Hayes did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Melissa. That was not my question. The courtroom seemed to shrink around those 5 words. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the faint ache in my shoulders from pushing across the garage, the hallway, the carpet strip. Pain had become a language my body spoke quietly every day. I had learned not to answer it out loud. Melissa lifted the tissue to her eye again, but no tear came. I never stopped being his wife, she said, voice soft, almost wounded. I did everything I could for Daniel. I gave up years of my life taking care of him. Years of my life. Not our years. Not our marriage. Hers. Thomas Caldwell made a small note on his pad. He did not look surprised. That was the thing about Caldwell. He had the patience of a man who had seen liars decorate the truth until it looked expensive. Brandon began presenting the story they had built, brick by brick, over months. Melissa, the exhausted caregiver. Melissa, the loyal wife trapped inside hospital rooms and insurance calls. Melissa, the woman who had cooked, cleaned, driven, scheduled appointments, managed medications, sacrificed career opportunities, and held my life together while I supposedly sank into anger and helplessness. He spoke of my settlement. From the construction accident, as if it were a lottery ticket I was too bitter to share. He spoke of our house as if the wheelchair ramp, widened doorways, roll-in shower, and lowered kitchen counters were luxury upgrades instead of the architecture of my independence. He made my life sound like property. He made my chair sound like evidence against me. I watched Melissa while he talked. She nodded at the right moments. She looked down when he mentioned my second surgery. She pressed her lips together when he described the burden of pushing me through recovery. That part almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because the truth was sitting in my chest like a stone. She had not pushed me through recovery. She had pushed a version of herself through the neighborhood, through Facebook posts, through church fundraisers, through polite conversations where people told her she was an angel. I remembered those posts. A photograph of her hand resting on mine in the hospital bed, taken 3 minutes after she had asked whether the insurance check would be delayed. A picture of a casserole she did not cook, captioned with words about devotion. A smiling selfie outside the rehabilitation center on a morning she dropped me at the entrance and drove away before I made it through the automatic doors. Nobody sees abandonment when it is wearing good lighting. Brandon placed a printed stack of exhibits on the table and said, Mrs. Whitaker has carried this marriage on her back. Judge Hayes glanced at the papers, then back at Melissa. And you are requesting control of the medical settlement trust? For Daniel's benefit, Melissa said quickly. Too quickly. He is not realistic about his needs. There it was. The clean little sentence that turned concern into control. I felt Caldwell shift beside me. Not much. Just enough to let me know he had heard it too. Brandon continued, explaining that I had become isolated, distrustful, financially unreasonable. He said Melissa needed the house because she had been the stable partner. He said she needed authority over the funds because I had shown poor judgment. He said a lot of things that sounded polished enough to pass for mercy. But every polished lie has a seam. You just have to wait for the light to hit it. Judge Hayes folded her hands. Mr. Whitaker, she said, turning to me for the first time since the question, do you understand what your wife is asking this court to grant her? My mouth was dry, but my voice came out steady. Yes, Your Honor. And do you agree that she has been your primary caregiver for the past 3 years? Across the room, Melissa finally looked at me. Not with love. Not with regret. With warning. I could almost hear what she used to say at home when guests were close enough to see our curtains move. Do not embarrass me, Daniel. I looked at the judge. No, Your Honor, I said. She cared for the story. Not for me. The silence that followed had weight. Melissa's face tightened. Brandon's pen stopped moving. Caldwell slid one folder closer to his right hand, still unopened. Judge Hayes leaned back slightly, and in her eyes I saw something change. Not sympathy. Focus. The kind of focus that comes right before a room learns the difference between a performance and the truth. Before the chair, before the courtroom, before Melissa learned how to make pity look like love, I was the kind of man who measured life in poured concrete, straight beams, and work boots left by the back door. I was not rich, not famous, Not the kind of man people turn to look at twice in a restaurant. But I could build things that stayed standing. That mattered to me. I started Whitaker Site Design with a used pickup, a second-hand drafting table, and a stubborn belief that if I did honest work long enough, honest results would follow. Most mornings began before sunrise. Coffee in a steel travel mug, blueprints rolled under my arm, the smell of sawdust and wet earth waiting at whatever job site needed me that day. Dayton winters could cut through a jacket like it had teeth, and Ohio summers could turn a hard hat into an oven. But I loved it. I loved watching empty lots become foundations, foundations become frames, frames become homes where families would argue over paint colors and hang Christmas lights in December. There is a quiet pride in building something another person gets to live inside. Melissa used to say that was what she loved about me. Back then, she worked the front desk at a small real estate office off Far Hills Avenue, answering phones, making coffee for agents who forgot her name, and studying for her license at night. She had this laugh that made ordinary rooms feel brighter. The first time I met her, she was standing in the rain outside a listing because her old Corolla would not start. I had stopped to check a drainage issue on the property next door, and she looked at me like I was either a rescue or another problem. I got the car running in 10 minutes. She bought me a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, and somehow I drank the whole thing because she was smiling at me over the lid of her cup. That was how we began. Nothing dramatic. No lightning. Just rain on asphalt, jumper cables, and two people who thought kindness was a solid enough place to start. For years, it was. I paid for her licensing classes without making a speech about it. She helped me organize invoices when my business started growing faster than my filing cabinet could handle. We ate dinner at folding tables, took weekend drives through neighborhoods where we could not afford a mailbox, and made promises that sounded simple because we were young enough to believe simple meant easy. When we bought our house, I put both our names on it. Caldwell later asked me why. I told him the truth. Because she was my wife. Because I did not believe in building a home with one name on the door. Because love, when you trust it, makes paperwork feel almost insulting. The house was a 3-bedroom brick ranch on a quiet street with maple trees along the curb and a garage just big enough for my tools. I widened the back patio myself, laid every stone by hand, and Melissa planted hydrangeas along the fence. On Friday nights, we ordered pizza from a place 2 miles away and sat on the living room floor making plans. She wanted to become one of the top agents in Montgomery County. I wanted to hire enough men to stop doing every site visit myself. We were not perfect, but we were moving in the same direction. At least I thought. We were. Success came slowly, then all at once. Melissa got sharper, smoother, more confident. She learned how to walk into a room and make people believe she belonged there. I was proud of her. I bragged about her closings to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, my company picked up contracts for small commercial builds, then county projects, then a medical office complex that changed everything. I started wearing collared shirts to meetings instead of hoodies. She started wearing dresses that cost more than my first toolbox. We laughed about it at first. Then the laughter changed. It got thinner, quieter, like a floorboard that still held weight but had begun to crack underneath. I missed the warning signs because I was busy being grateful. That is a dangerous thing, gratitude. Sometimes it makes a man call neglect patience. Sometimes it makes him explain away the coldness in his own kitchen. I told myself Melissa was tired. I told myself ambition takes energy. I told myself marriage has seasons. Then one gray morning in February, at a job site outside Beaver Creek, a scaffold inspection ran late. A delivery truck blocked the east entrance, and a steel support was not where the plans said it should be. I remember the foreman calling my name. I remember turning toward him. I remember the sky above the frame, pale and flat as primer. After that, my old life ended without asking permission. I woke up to the sound of machines before I understood I was inside one kind of life and outside another. The room was white, too white, the kind of white that makes every breath feel recorded. A monitor clicked beside me. An air vent hummed above me. Somewhere down the hall, rubber saws whispered over polished floors, and a nurse spoke in a voice soft enough to belong to someone else's dream. I tried to move my legs before I opened my eyes. Nothing answered. Not pain. Not pressure. Not even the dull ache a man expects after a bad fall. Just a quiet absence, like a phone ringing in an empty house. My mouth tasted like plastic. My throat felt packed with cotton. When I turned my head, Melissa was asleep in a chair by the window, wrapped in a beige cardigan, her makeup faded, one hand curled around her phone. For a moment, I felt relief so strong it almost made me cry. She was there. That was enough for my frightened mind to grab onto. Then the doctor came in, and the world narrowed to his face, his clipboard, and the careful way he said my name. He explained the injury in clean medical language. Spinal trauma. Incomplete response. Long recovery. No guarantees. People think devastation arrives loud, but mine came politely, in measured sentences under fluorescent lights. Melissa stood beside my bed and held my hand while he talked. Her fingers were cold. When he left, she leaned down and kissed my forehead. "We will get through this," she whispered. I believed her because I needed to. The first weeks were a blur of therapy rooms, insurance forms, plastic meal trays, and strangers teaching me how to do things I had done without thinking for 40 years. How to transfer from bed to chair. How to keep balance. How to shower without turning pride into a hazard. The first time they placed me in the wheelchair, I stared at the black frame and silver wheels like they had brought the wrong object into the room. That chair looked temporary. My body did not. Melissa cried that day. I remember because the therapist handed her tissues and told her grief was normal. I comforted her from the chair. That should have told me something, but I was too busy surviving to read the room. By the third month, our house had changed shape around my new life. The front steps became a ramp. The bathroom became a construction zone. Door frames were widened, rugs removed, shelves lowered. Every modification felt practical to me. To Melissa, it felt like an accusation. She stopped calling it our home and started calling it this place. She stopped saying wheelchair and started saying that thing. At first, she caught herself. Then she stopped catching herself. I try not to take it personally. I told myself she was grieving too. I told myself love can look tired and still be love. I told myself a lot of things a man tells himself when the silence at dinner becomes harder to move through than any doorway. I went to therapy 4 days a week. I learned the strength of my shoulders, the limits of my patience, the strange humiliation of needing help with a cabinet I had installed myself. I kept working from a desk in the converted den, answering calls, reviewing plans, keeping Whitaker's site design alive, one permit and one invoice at a time. My crews still needed paychecks. My clients still needed answers. I could not walk a site anymore, but I could still read a blueprint. I could still solve problems. I could still be useful. That word mattered more than I wanted to admit. Useful. A man can live with pain if he knows he still has a place in the world. Melissa began finding reasons to keep me out of hers. A company dinner with bad wheelchair access. A listing party where the driveway was gravel. A weekend open house that would be boring for me anyway. Each excuse came wrapped in concern, but concern has a tone, and hers had started to sound like embarrassment wearing perfume. One evening, 8 months after the accident, she stood in front of the hallway mirror fastening a pearl earring while I waited near the door in a navy button-down shirt. I had spent 20 minutes getting dressed without asking for help. She looked at me through the reflection and sighed. "Daniel, please do not make tonight harder than it has to be." I looked down at my chair, then back at her. "I thought I was going with you." She closed her eyes for half a second, just long enough to tell the truth without saying it. "People will ask questions." The sentence sat between us like a locked gate. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I just rolled back from the door and watched her leave under the porch light we had picked out together, her heels tapping across the walkway, quick and clean, as if distance could save her from being married to what happened to me. The first proof that Melissa had stopped seeing me as her husband did not come from a love letter, a hotel receipt, or a late-night phone call. It came from a spreadsheet. That sounds almost too ordinary to matter, but ordinary things are where people hide the truth because nobody thinks to look there. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon while rain tapped against the den window and my physical therapist had just left. My shoulders ached from transfer drills. My palms were tender. The house smelled faintly of disinfectant and the lemon candle Melissa burned whenever she wanted the rooms to feel more cheerful than they were. I had rolled to the desk to check invoices when I saw her laptop sitting open beside a stack of real estate brochures. She had been using the printer and left in a hurry for a showing in Oakwood. I was not looking for secrets. I was looking for the revised bathroom contractor invoice because the roll-in shower had gone $3,000 over budget and the insurance adjuster wanted documentation by Friday. The file folder on the desktop was named House Expenses. Clean, practical, harmless. I clicked it. Inside were receipts, estimates, tax records, and one spreadsheet titled Caregiver Reimbursement. My stomach tightened before my mind understood why. Melissa had told me the caregiver benefit paperwork was still pending. She had said the state program was slow, that the insurance company needed more signatures, that nobody could expect miracles from bureaucracy. But the spreadsheet was not pending. It was organized by month, color-coded, and painfully complete. Payments had been coming in for almost a year. Not huge amounts, not enough to make a person rich, but enough to pay for real help. Enough to hire trained assistants for mornings when I struggled most. Enough to stop me from choosing between dignity and asking my wife to do something she resented. The listed caregiver was Melissa Whitaker. The hours were beautiful fiction. Morning transfers, meal preparation, transportation to therapy, medication management, evening assistance. She had written my life into neat little boxes and paid herself for kindness she had not given. I sat there with the cursor blinking over her name while the rain blurred the maple trees outside. The room did not spin. I almost wished it had. Spinning would have felt dramatic, like the body admitting something terrible had happened. Instead, everything became very still. The desk, the window, the cold coffee near my hand, my wedding ring resting against the wheel rim. I opened another tab. Bank. Deposits. Then another. Email confirmations. Then another. A transportation refusal form from Miami Valley Hospital, signed electronically 3 months earlier. I remembered that night. I remembered it too clearly. My second surgery had run late. I was groggy, scared, and cold under one of those thin hospital blankets that never quite covers enough. The nurse said medical transport could take me home safely because transferring into Melissa's sport utility vehicle would be difficult after anesthesia. Melissa stood near the door in a red dress beneath a gray coat, looking at her phone every few seconds. She said the transport fee was ridiculous. The nurse explained it was covered under my policy with authorization. Melissa said, "He can manage." I thought she meant we could manage. That was how loyal men hear cruel sentences. We translate them into something survivable. But the form on the screen told a cleaner story. Transport declined by spouse. Patient released to caregiver. Except she had not taken me home. Not right away. She had left me in the parking garage near Level B while she moved the car, then texted 20 minutes later that she had an emergency with a client and I needed to wait. 20 minutes became an hour. The garage lights hummed above me. Cars passed. People glanced over and kept walking because discomfort makes strangers busy. My phone battery died at 11% while I was trying to call her again. A security guard eventually found me and called a hospital aide. When Melissa came back, she was angry that I had embarrassed her. I apologized that night. That is the part that still burns. I apologized. On the laptop, beneath the refusal form, there was a message thread synced from her phone. One sentence sat there in gray text, small and casual, like it had not rearranged the bones of my marriage. Once the judge gives me the house, I can finally start over without the chair in every room. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, as if the words might become less ugly if I gave them more time. They did not. The chair in every room. Not Daniel. Not my husband. Not the man who paid for her classes, built her patio, held her hand through every fear she ever named. Just the chair. I closed the laptop halfway and looked toward the hallway, where the ramp cut a clean line through the home I had built with both hands before I lost the use of my legs. That ramp had never been the thing ruining the house. It was only the thing making it possible for me to remain inside it. Melissa came home 40 minutes later smelling like rain and expensive perfume, talking fast about a difficult buyer and a closing date. I listened. I nodded. I even asked how it went. My voice sounded calm, steady, almost kind. But inside, something had gone quiet in a permanent way. That afternoon I stopped trying to convince my wife to love the man I still was. I started saving proof of the man she was pretending to be. I did not confront Melissa that night, or the next morning, or the week after that. Confrontation gives a dishonest person the gift of preparation, and I had already given my wife too many gifts she did not deserve. So I learned to become quiet in a different way. Not defeated quiet. Not begging quiet. The kind of quiet that watches, remembers, and makes copies. Every morning, After Melissa left for showings or meetings or whatever version of herself she was selling that day, I rolled into the den, closed the door, and built a record of the truth. The caregiver deposits went into one folder. The reimbursement forms went into another. Hospital discharge papers, therapy schedules, transportation notes, bank statements, text messages, emails, contractor invoices for the ramp and bathroom. Everything went into labeled files on an encrypted drive Caldwell later called the cleanest timeline I have ever seen. At the time, it did not feel clean. It felt like picking glass out of carpet with bare fingers, one tiny glittering piece at a time. Each document proved something I wished had never happened. Each screenshot made the marriage smaller. I saved the message about starting over without the chair in every room. I saved the text where she complained to her friend that my ramp made the front of the house look like a clinic. I saved the email where she told the insurance adjuster she personally transported me to every appointment, even on dates when rideshare receipts and clinic logs showed I had gone alone. I did not hack anything. I did not break into anything. I only preserved what lived in accounts, devices, and paperwork tied to the life we still legally shared. There is a difference between spying and finally reading the labels on the boxes someone has been stacking around you. The hardest part was acting normal. Melissa would come home with takeout from places she liked, not places I could reach easily. She would stand at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, telling me about buyers, sellers, interest rates, staging furniture, anything except us. I would nod, ask questions, and keep my face steady. Sometimes she seemed almost disappointed that I was not angrier. People who build false stories need you to play your assigned role. Hers required me to be bitter, unstable, impossible. So I gave her none of that. No slammed doors. No raised voice. No late-night argument she could record out of context. Just calm answers, paid bills, therapy appointments, and the slow construction of a truth she could not decorate. The first call I made was not to an attorney. It was to the patient advocate at Miami Valley Hospital. My hands shook so badly I had to place the phone on speaker because holding it felt like balancing a cup on a moving truck. I asked for records from the night of my second surgery. The woman on the line was polite, careful, and professional. She said some security footage was retained because an incident report had been filed when I was found alone in the parking garage. Incident report. Two harmless words that made my chest tighten like a belt pulled too far. To Melissa, that night had been an inconvenience. To the hospital, it had been an incident. To me, it had been the moment I should have understood she was gone. 2 days later, the report arrived by secure email. It did not use emotional language. Reports never do. Patient located in parking structure level B. Patient stated spouse had left to retrieve vehicle. Patient unable to contact spouse due to depleted phone battery. Security assisted patient back to discharge area. Reading it felt stranger than living it. On paper, abandonment looks almost tidy. The second call was to a benefits administrator. That one took longer. Forms, authorizations, identity verification, hold music that looped until it felt like punishment. By the end, I had confirmation that Melissa had certified caregiver hours under penalty of repayment if false information was provided. The phrase sat in my notebook like a match waiting for air. The third call was to Thomas Caldwell, whose number came from a contractor friend who had survived a divorce with his business still breathing. Caldwell's office was downtown, above a credit union, with old brick walls and windows that looked out over Main Street. He did not pity me when I rolled in. He did not overhelp with the door. He just stood, shook my hand, and said, "Tell me what you can prove. Not what happened. Not how you feel. What you can prove." That sentence steadied me more than any comfort could have. For 90 minutes, I gave him the folders, the timeline, the deposits, the messages, the hospital report, the transport refusal form. He read quietly, glasses low on his nose, pen moving now and then across a yellow pad. When he reached the message about the chair in every room, his jaw tightened for half a second. That was the only sign he was human. Finally, he leaned back and said, "Daniel, she is not just asking for property. She is asking the court to reward a performance." I looked at the framed diploma on his wall, then down at my hands resting on the wheels. "Can we stop her?" Caldwell closed the folder. "No," he said. "We let her perform first. Then we show them the script." By the time the hearing returned to Melissa's side of the story, She had settled back into her role so completely that I almost admired the craft of it. Almost. Brandon Pierce stood beside her table with one hand resting on the back of his chair, his voice low and respectful, as if the courtroom were a chapel and my wife were some kind of saint who had misplaced her halo in the parking lot. He guided her through the years after my accident, one careful question at a time. Did you attend medical appointments? Yes. Did you help coordinate home modifications? Yes. Did you give up professional opportunities? Of course. Did you suffer emotionally while trying to support your husband? Melissa looked down, pressed the tissue to her nose, and whispered, "Every day." The words floated across the room like perfume. Sweet, expensive, and designed to cover something rotten underneath. Judge Hayes watched without expression. Caldwell did not object much. That was part of the plan, but knowing that did not make it easier to sit there while Melissa repainted my pain with herself in the center. She spoke about the ramp as if it had been her burden. She spoke about the shower as if wider doors had narrowed her life. She told the court she had lifted me, driven me, scheduled everything, managed everything, sacrificed everything. I listened to my own life being described by a woman who had learned the language of care without practicing the act. It is a strange thing to hear someone steal your suffering and wear it as evidence. Brandon then placed several photographs on the display screen. There was Melissa smiling beside my hospital bed, her hand resting on my shoulder. There was Melissa holding a casserole at our kitchen counter, the one a neighbor had cooked for us. There was Melissa standing beside the new front ramp in a blue sweater, captioned from social media with words about resilience and devotion. The photographs worked. I could feel the room soften. Even the clerk looked at the screen a second too long. Pictures are powerful because they do not show what happened before or after the shutter clicked. They do not show Melissa handing the phone back to me after the hospital photo and saying, "Make sure you tag me if you post it." They do not show her putting the casserole in the oven for 5 minutes so the kitchen would smell homemade when visitors arrived. They do not show me measuring the ramp angle myself at midnight because the first contractor got it wrong and Melissa said she was tired of dealing with disability stuff. Brandon turned toward me then, his smile small and practiced. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "is it not true that your wife pushed your wheelchair for years after your accident?" The courtroom waited. Melissa finally looked at me, and there it was again, that silent warning behind her eyes. "Be careful. Do not embarrass me. Do not ruin the version of us I have sold." I placed my right hand on the wheel rim, feeling the smooth rubber beneath my thumb. "No, sir," I said. She pushed a story, not the chair. The sentence did not come out loud. It did not need to. It crossed the room cleanly and changed the air. Brandon's smile tightened. Melissa's tissue stopped halfway to her face. Judge Hayes lowered her pen. Caldwell stayed still, but I saw his left hand move 1 inch closer to the first folder. Brandon recovered quickly. Men like him always do. He stepped forward and tilted his head as if I were a difficult child. "So your testimony is that your wife provided no meaningful support after your accident?" "My testimony," I said, keeping my voice even, "is that support leaves records. So does abandonment." He blinked. Just once. But I saw it. He had expected resentment. He had prepared for anger. He had not prepared for documentation. Caldwell stood then, buttoning his jacket with calm precision. "Your Honor," he said, when opposing counsel is finished characterizing Mrs. Whitaker's performance, "we have records that may help the court distinguish between public presentation and private conduct." Melissa's face lost a shade of color. Not enough for the room to notice, maybe. Enough for me. Brandon objected before Caldwell had even named the documents, calling them prejudicial, incomplete, taken out of context. Judge Hayes lifted her hand and silenced him without raising her voice. "Mr. Pierce, if your client is asking this court to grant her authority over a medical settlement based on caregiving, then her actual caregiving is not a side issue. It is the issue." The room went quiet again, that deep courtroom quiet where even paper seems afraid to move. Caldwell opened the folder. I looked across at Melissa, and for the first time in 3 years, she was the one trapped in a chair she could not roll away from. Caldwell did not rush. That was what made it worse for Melissa. A loud man gives you something to fight. A calm man makes you hear every footstep on the way to the truth. He placed the first document on the monitor, and the screen changed from Melissa's smiling hospital photograph to a plain white form with black text, dates, signatures, and the kind of official language nobody can charm. Mrs. Whitaker, Caldwell said, do you recognize this medical transport refusal form from Miami Valley Hospital? Melissa stared at the screen as if the words had been written in another language. I signed a lot of forms during that period, she said. I was under tremendous stress. Brandon stood. Your Honor, medical paperwork can be confusing, especially for a spouse under emotional strain. Judge Hayes looked over her glasses. She may answer. Caldwell nodded once. This form is dated March 12th, the evening of Mr. Whitaker's second surgery. It states that covered medical transport was offered for discharge and declined by spouse. Is that your electronic signature? Melissa swallowed. It appears to be. And the stated reason for declining transport? He let the question hang while the whole room looked at the screen. The words were small, but not small enough to hide. Cost unnecessary. Patient can manage with family vehicle. Caldwell read them aloud, gently, almost kindly, which made them cut deeper. Melissa shifted in her chair. We were trying to be practical. My hands tightened in my lap. Practical. That was the word she chose for leaving a medicated man in a wheelchair under concrete lights because safe transportation did not fit into her evening. Caldwell clicked to the next document. Hospital security filed an incident report 94 minutes after discharge. Patient located alone in parking structure level B. Patient unable to contact spouse due to depleted phone battery. Security assisted patient back to discharge area. The courtroom did not move. Even Brandon had gone quiet. Judge Hayes turned to Melissa, her face unreadable. Mrs. Whitaker, if you were his caregiver, why was hospital security required to locate your husband in a parking garage after surgery? Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, there was no polished answer waiting behind her teeth. I went to get the car, she said finally. Caldwell clicked again. This time, the monitor showed a still image from the hospital garage. Grainy, gray, time-stamped. Me in my chair beside a concrete pillar, a blanket across my lap, head tilted slightly downward. The image was quiet, but it filled the room like thunder. Caldwell said, the hospital provided partial security footage connected to the incident report. No audio, just timestamps. He pressed play. I did not look at the screen at first. I looked at Melissa. Her face changed before the video even moved. On the monitor, she appeared near the elevator doors in a red dress under a gray coat, holding her phone, walking fast. She passed within 10 feet of me. I lifted one hand, not dramatically, not desperately, just enough to signal that I was there. She did not stop. She did not turn around. She walked toward the exit, and 30 seconds later, a dark sport utility vehicle rolled past the camera and out of frame. The footage continued. Cars entered. Cars left. A janitor pushed a cart in the distance. I remained beside the pillar, small beneath the fluorescent lights. Timestamps changed. 10 minutes. 20. 40. The courtroom watched silence become evidence. Caldwell stopped the video before the security guard arrived. He did not need to show rescue. The abandonment had already spoken for itself. Then he placed the final page on the monitor. A message thread, date stamped the same night, between Melissa and her friend Audrey. Melissa's text appeared in the center of the screen. I am done babysitting him. The words were not shouted. They did not have to be. They sat there, gray and ordinary, the way cruel things often do when the person writing them believes nobody important will ever read them. Judge Hayes looked from the screen to Melissa. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, and her voice was still calm, still controlled, still more dangerous than anger. Why did you tell this court you were beside him that night? Melissa's tissue trembled in her hand. Brandon whispered something to her, but she did not answer him. Her eyes flicked to me then, not with warning this time. With fear. Not fear of me. I had not moved. I had not raised my voice. Fear of the truth standing upright in a room where she thought I would be the only one sitting. Caldwell closed the folder. Your Honor, this is not an isolated misunderstanding. We have benefit certifications, appointment logs, rideshare receipts, and communications showing a pattern. Mrs. Whitaker represented herself as a full-time caregiver while repeatedly declining or outsourcing the care for which she accepted reimbursement. Judge Hayes leaned back, hands folded, the question still hanging over Melissa like a door that would not reopen. Across the room, the woman who had told strangers she carried me for years could not carry one honest answer across 10 feet of polished wood. Judge Hayes did not rule right away. She sat with the documents in front of her, one hand resting near the edge of the bench, eyes moving slowly across the pages like she was giving every lie the dignity of being fully read before she buried it. Melissa stared down at the table. Brandon Pierce whispered to her twice, but she did not answer. The tissue in her hand had been twisted into a small white rope. I remember noticing that because my mind needed somewhere simple to go. After years of complicated pain, there was something almost peaceful about watching paper do what pleading never could. Paper did not tremble. Paper did not apologize too late. Paper did not pretend it loved you when witnesses entered the room. Caldwell stood beside me, quiet as stone, while Judge Hayes reviewed the benefit certifications, the hospital report, the appointment logs, the transportation records, the messages, the trust documents, and the settlement terms that had been written to protect my medical care, not finance Melissa's fresh start. Finally, the judge looked up. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "this court is not persuaded that granting you control of Mr. Whitaker's medical settlement would serve his best interests." Melissa's head lifted sharply. Brandon started to speak, but the judge raised one finger. "I am not finished." For words, clean as a closing door. She continued, voice even. "The Special Needs Trust would remain under independent administration. The home modifications, directly tied to my disability, would be considered necessary accommodations, not marital luxuries to be liquidated for convenience." Melissa's request for primary control over the house was denied pending final property division. Her claim of extensive, unpaid caregiving would not be credited without further review. And the reimbursement issue, the false caregiver certifications, would be referred to the appropriate civil agency for investigation. Melissa's face folded in slow motion. Not dramatically, not like in movies. More like a mask losing the string that held it behind the years. "Your Honor," she whispered. I was overwhelmed. Judge Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "Many people are overwhelmed, Mrs. Whitaker. They do not all leave their spouses in parking garages and call it caregiving." The words were not loud, but they moved through the room with the force of a verdict already living inside everyone who heard it. I looked down at my hands. Same hands that had framed walls, signed payroll checks, held Melissa's coffee on rainy mornings, pushed wheels across wet concrete, and gathered proof while my heart tried to understand how love had become paperwork. They were not the hands of the man I used to be. They were not weaker either, just different. When the hearing ended, chairs scraped, folders closed, and people began pretending they had not just watched a marriage get separated from its costume. Melissa came toward me near the aisle. For a second, I saw the woman from the rain outside that first listing, the one with the broken Corolla and the bright laugh. Maybe memory is cruel that way. It brings flowers to funerals. "Danny," she said softly. She had not called me that in years. The name reached for something old in me and found the door locked. I made mistakes. I looked at her cream dress, her careful hair, the tissue still pinched between her fingers. "No," I said. "You made choices." Her mouth trembled. I was scared. I nodded once. So was I. That was all I gave her. Not because I hated her. Hate would have meant she still had a room in me. She did not. Caldwell stepped beside me and asked if I needed help with the chair. I almost said yes from habit. Then I remembered the hallway, the carpet strip, the rain, the judge's question, the video, the silence, the truth standing where my legs could not. "I have got it," I said. Outside the courtroom, the same blue carpet waited at the threshold. This time, I set my palms on the rims and pushed with one steady motion. The wheels crossed cleanly. Melissa stood behind me, crying quietly enough for strangers to feel sorry for her. I did not turn around. The courthouse doors opened to a gray Ohio afternoon, rain thinning over the steps, traffic hissing along the street. I rolled down the ramp alone, but I was not leaving empty. I had my home protected, my care protected, my name cleared, and something I had not felt in 3 years settling back into my chest. My wife thought the wheelchair made me smaller. But in that courtroom, it was the only thing holding up the truth she could not stand under.